Right now, something is happening that most people are either ignoring or completely misunderstanding. And by the time they realize what is really going on, it may already be too late. The idea that thousands of banks are suddenly aligning with XRP is not just another headline or hype moment. It represents a shift in how money could move across the entire world. When you hear a number like 11,000 banks, your first reaction might be disbelief. And that is exactly why this moment is so powerful. Because while people are still questioning if it is real, the system itself is quietly evolving in the background. This is not about quick profits or short term excitement. This is about infrastructure being built, tested, and slowly integrated into the financial system that runs the world. And if you understand this early, you place yourself in a completely different position than the average investor. When we talk about banks connecting to XRP, many people imagine that every bank is directly buying and holding XRP, but that is not how this system works. What is actually happening is much deeper and more important. Financial institutions around the world are starting to connect to payment networks that are designed to move money faster, cheaper, and more efficiently than traditional systems like SWIFT. For decades, SWIFT has been the backbone of international payments, but it is slow, expensive, and outdated. Transactions can take days to settle, fees can be high, and there are many intermediaries involved. This creates friction, and in the modern digital world, friction is something institutions want to eliminate. This is where XRP comes into the picture, not as just another cryptocurrency, but as a bridge asset designed specifically to solve this problem. Instead of pre funding accounts in different countries, banks can use XRP to move value instantly across borders. This reduces costs, increases speed, and frees up massive amounts of capital that would otherwise be locked in accounts around the world. When you hear that thousands of banks are connecting, it does not mean they are all directly holding XRP right now, but it does mean they are connecting to systems where XRP can play a role when needed. And that is the key detail most people miss. The number 11,000 is not random. There are roughly that many financial institutions connected to global messaging systems. And the idea that these institutions are moving toward modern payment rails is not speculation, it is a natural evolution. Technology always replaces inefficiency. And in the world of finance, efficiency is everything. Banks are not emotional. They do not care about hype or opinions. They care about cost, speed, compliance, and reliability. If a system offers better performance in these areas, it becomes very difficult to ignore. What makes this situation even more interesting is the timing. We are at a point where digital assets are starting to gain clarity in regulation, and institutions are becoming more comfortable exploring blockchain based solutions. For years, XRP has been building quietly in the background, forming partnerships, developing technology, and positioning itself as a solution for real world problems. While many other cryptocurrencies focus on speculation or niche use cases, XRP has always been focused on payments, and that focus is now starting to align with what the financial world actually needs. At the same time, retail investors often look at price first and fundamental second, which leads to confusion. People ask why the price is not moving aggressively if something so big is happening, but they fail to understand that infrastructure builds slowly and then moves quickly. Adoption does not happen overnight, it happens in stages. First, systems are tested, then integrated, then scaled. We are currently in that transition phase where things are moving from testing to real world use. And that is why headlines like this are starting to appear more frequently. Another important point to understand is that banks do not move together in a single moment. Each institution has its own timeline, its own regulations, and its own internal processes. When we say thousands of banks are connecting, it represents a network effect rather than a single event. One bank connects, then another. And over time, this creates a system where using faster and cheaper payment methods becomes the standard rather than the exception. Once that tipping point is reached, adoption can accelerate very quickly. This is why the phrase "it's happening" is not just hype, it reflects a process that has been building for years and is now starting to become visible. The groundwork has been laid, the technology exists, and the need for better payment systems is undeniable. What we are witnessing is the early stage of a transformation that could redefine how money moves globally, and XRP is positioned right in the center of that transformation. Understanding this moment requires shifting your mindset from short term thinking to long term vision. Instead of asking what will happen tomorrow, the better question is what happens when this system fully matures and becomes the standard? Because when that happens, the value of being early is something that cannot be recreated later. To fully understand why this situation is getting so much attention, you need to look deeper into how global payments actually work today, because most people assume money moves instantly across borders when in reality it does not. When a bank in one country wants to send money to another country, it usually cannot do it directly. So it relies on a chain of intermediary banks, each one taking time and charging fees. And this creates a slow and expensive process that has remained almost unchanged for decades. This is why, even in 2026, international transfers can still take several days. And in a world where information moves instantly, this delay makes the financial system feel outdated and inefficient. This is exactly the problem that modern payment networks are trying to solve, and it explains why thousands of banks are now exploring or connecting to new systems. These systems are not just small upgrades, they are complete redesigns of how money moves, and they focus on removing unnecessary steps, reducing costs, and increasing transparency. Instead of relying on multiple intermediaries, these networks aim to create direct or near direct connections between institutions. And this is where blockchain technology becomes extremely valuable. It allows value to move in real time with clear records and minimal friction, and that is something traditional systems struggle to achieve. XRP plays a very specific role in this new structure, and that role is often misunderstood. It is not trying to replace banks or eliminate the financial system. Instead, it is designed to enhance it by acting as a bridge between different currencies. Imagine a situation where a bank in one country needs to send money to another country where it does not hold that local currency. Traditionally, the bank would need to pre-fund an account in that foreign currency, which means locking up capital that could be used elsewhere. This is inefficient and costly, especially at a large scale. With XRP, that same transaction can be completed by converting the original currency into XRP, sending it across the network almost instantly, and then converting it into the destination currency on the other side. This entire process can happen in seconds, and it removes the need for pre funded accounts. When you think about this on a global level, the amount of capital that could be freed up is enormous. And that is one of the main reasons institutions are paying attention. It is not about speculation, it is about efficiency and cost savings. And those are things banks always prioritize. Now, when headlines mention that 11,000 banks are connected, it is important to understand that this refers to the broader network effect. Many of these institutions are already part of global messaging systems. And as these systems evolve or integrate with new technologies, the reach becomes massive. It does not mean every bank is actively using XRP today, but it does mean the infrastructure is being built in a way that allows XRP to be used when needed. This distinction is critical because it shows that adoption is not a single moment, but a gradual process that expands over time. Another key factor in this situation is competition. Banks are not operating in isolation, They are competing with each other to provide faster and cheaper services to their customers. If one bank adopts a more efficient payment method, others will eventually feel pressure to do the same. Otherwise, they risk losing clients. This creates a domino effect where adoption spreads not just because it is beneficial, but because it becomes necessary to stay competitive. Over time, what starts as an option can turn into a standard, and that is when real transformation happens. At the same time, regulation has been one of the biggest barriers to adoption, and that is slowly changing. Governments and financial authorities around the world are becoming more open to blockchain based solutions, and they are working on frameworks that allow institutions to use these technologies while staying compliant. This is a crucial step because banks cannot operate without regulatory clarity. As this clarity improves, it removes uncertainty and makes it easier for institutions to move forward with integration. It is also important to recognize that large scale financial changes do not happen overnight. Even if the technology is ready, institutions need time to test, adapt, and implement it within their existing systems. This is why progress can sometimes feel slow, but behind the scenes, significant work is being done. Partnerships are being formed, systems are being upgraded, and real world use cases are being developed. Each of these steps brings the system closer to full scale adoption, even if it is not immediately visible in price movements or daily headlines. Retail investors often focus on short term price action, but institutions focus on long term utility. They are not concerned with daily market fluctuations. They are interested in whether a solution can reliably improve their operations. If XRP continues to prove its value in this area, its role in the financial system could become much more significant over time. This is why understanding the bigger picture is so important because it allows you to see beyond the noise and focus on what is actually being built. As more banks connect to modern payment networks, the foundation for a new financial system continues to grow stronger. Each connection adds to the network. Each integration increases potential usage, and each step forward brings the system closer to a point where using fast, low cost digital assets is no longer optional but expected. This is the stage where early understanding can make a major difference because once adoption becomes obvious to everyone, the opportunity to be early is already gone. When people hear about banks connecting to a system like XRP, one of the biggest questions that comes up is why they would even need something like this when traditional systems already exist. The answer becomes clear when you look at how global liquidity actually works behind the scenes. Banks do not simply send money directly to each other in most international transactions. Instead, they rely on pre funded accounts in different countries, and these accounts sit idle most of the time just to make sure liquidity is available when needed. This means billions of dollars are locked up across the financial system, not being used efficiently, just waiting to facilitate cross border payments. This is where the concept of on demand liquidity becomes important. Instead of holding money in different countries all the time, institutions can use a digital asset as a bridge to move value instantly when a transaction happens. This reduces the need for idle capital and allows money to be used more productively elsewhere. XRP has been designed specifically to support this kind of system where value does not need to sit still but can move dynamically across borders in seconds. This changes the way liquidity is managed, and it directly targets one of the most expensive inefficiencies in global banking. Another important factor is settlement time. In the traditional system, even after a transaction is initiated, it can take days for funds to fully settle between institutions. This delay is caused by multiple layers of verification, intermediaries, and outdated messaging systems that were never designed for the digital age. In contrast, blockchain based systems can settle transactions almost instantly, reducing uncertainty and freeing up capital much faster. When banks realize they can reduce settlement time from days to seconds, it becomes a powerful incentive to explore alternatives. At the same time, it is important to understand that banks do not adopt new systems just because they are faster. They also need to ensure security, compliance, and stability. Financial institutions operate in a highly regulated environment, and even small mistakes can have large consequences. This is why any new technology must go through extensive testing and validation before it is used at scale. The process is slow, but it is necessary, and it is one of the main reasons why adoption of new financial infrastructure takes years rather than months. Ripple's approach to solving this problem has been to work directly with financial institutions rather than trying to replace them. Instead of disrupting the system, the goal is to integrate into it and improve it from within. This is a key difference compared to many other digital assets that focus on replacing traditional finance entirely. By working within the existing structure, integration becomes more realistic because banks can adopt the technology without having to rebuild their entire system from scratch. Over time, as more institutions experiment with faster payment solutions, a pattern begins to form. The benefits of speed, cost reduction, and efficiency become more obvious, and early adopters gain a competitive advantage. This creates pressure on other institutions to explore similar solutions because no bank wants to be slower or more expensive than its competitors. This competitive pressure is one of the strongest forces driving financial innovation, even more than technology itself. Another layer to consider is global trade. Every day, massive amounts of money move between countries for goods, services, and financial obligations. As globalization increases, the demand for faster and more efficient settlement systems also increases. Traditional systems were not designed for the scale and speed of modern global trade, and this creates bottlenecks that slow down the entire financial ecosystem. A system that can remove these bottlenecks becomes extremely valuable, not just for banks, but for entire economies. At the same time, there is still skepticism in the market. Many people question whether blockchain based solutions can truly handle the scale required for global banking. These concerns are valid because financial systems require extreme reliability. However, the ongoing development, testing, and gradual integration into real world use cases is slowly addressing these concerns. Each successful test and each new partnership adds more confidence to the system, even if progress is not always visible to the public. It is also important to recognize that major financial shifts often happen quietly at first. By the time the general public becomes fully aware of a change, much of the groundwork has already been completed. Infrastructure builds in the background, and only later does it become visible through widespread adoption. This is why understanding early signals is so important because they often represent the foundation of something much larger that is still forming. As these systems continue to develop, the role of digital assets like XRP becomes clearer in the context of liquidity management and cross border settlement. The focus is not on replacing money, but on making money move more efficiently across different systems and jurisdictions. If this model continues to prove effective, it could reshape how global finance operates at a fundamental level, making transactions faster, cheaper, and more interconnected than ever before. As the conversation around banks and XRP continues to grow, the most important thing to understand is that we are not talking about a future idea anymore. We are talking about a transition that is already in motion. When financial systems begin to change, they do not change in a visible explosion at first. Instead, they evolve quietly through infrastructure updates, back-end integrations, and network expansions that most people never see. By the time the average person notices the change, the system has usually already been running in the background for a long time. This is why the idea of thousands of banks connecting to modern payment rails is not just a headline, it is a signal of long term structural movement. At this stage, one of the most important developments is interoperability. Banks and financial institutions do not operate on a single unified system. They use different technologies, different networks, and different regional frameworks. This creates complexity when money needs to move across borders. The goal of new financial infrastructure is not to replace all of these systems overnight, but to connect them in a way that allows seamless communication between them. This is where blockchain based solutions become useful because they can act as a neutral layer that connects different financial systems without forcing them to completely change their internal structure. In this environment, XRP is often positioned as a bridge asset, meaning it helps connect different currencies and payment systems by acting as a temporary medium of exchange. This allows value to move from one system to another without needing multiple intermediaries or long settlement times. The importance of this role becomes clearer when you consider the scale of global banking. Even small improvements in efficiency can lead to massive savings when applied across thousands of institutions and billions of transactions. As more institutions explore this type of infrastructure, the concept of network effect becomes extremely important. A network effect happens when a system becomes more valuable as more participants join it. In traditional banking systems, adding more participants often increases complexity, but in modern digital networks, adding more participants can actually increase efficiency and utility because it strengthens liquidity and improves connectivity. This is one of the reasons why integration across multiple institutions is so significant. It is not just about individual adoption, but about the overall strength of the network. Another important development is the gradual shift in mindset within financial institutions. For many years, banks were cautious about adopting blockchain technology due to uncertainty, regulation, and risk concerns. But over time, as the technology has matured and regulatory frameworks have become clearer, institutions have started to take a more open approach. Instead of asking whether blockchain will replace existing systems, they are now asking how it can improve them. This shift in perspective is a major turning point because it changes the conversation from resistance to integration. At the same time, global financial pressure is increasing. Cross border payments are becoming more frequent, global trade is expanding, and digital economies are growing rapidly. This creates demand for faster settlement, lower costs, and more transparent systems. Traditional infrastructure is struggling to keep up with this demand, which creates an opportunity for new systems to fill the gap. When existing systems become inefficient at scale, innovation is no longer optional, it becomes necessary. It is also important to understand that large scale financial adoption is rarely driven by hype. Instead, it is driven by practical necessity. Banks do not adopt new systems because they are popular, they adopt them because they solve real problems. If a system reduces costs, improves speed, and maintains compliance, it becomes a serious candidate for integration. This is why the focus is always on utility rather than speculation in institutional environments. As integration expands, the visibility of these systems may still remain low to the public. Many of the changes happen at the infrastructure level, meaning they are not immediately reflected in everyday usage or public awareness. However, over time, as more payment flows begin to use these systems, the impact becomes more noticeable. This is often how financial transitions occur, gradual at first, then increasingly visible as adoption reaches critical mass. One of the most misunderstood aspects of this entire process is timing. People often expect rapid changes once they hear about large numbers like thousands of banks or global networks. But in reality, financial transformation is slow at the beginning and faster later. The early stage is about building trust, testing systems, and ensuring stability. Once those foundations are strong enough, expansion can happen much more quickly because the risks are already reduced. In the context of XRP and global banking, this stage represents early infrastructure alignment rather than full scale usage. It means the groundwork is being laid for a system that can support large volumes of transactions in the future. Whether or not this leads to widespread usage immediately is less important than the fact that the system is being positioned for long term integration. At this point, the most important takeaway is not short term price movement or immediate adoption headlines, but the direction of development. Financial systems are slowly moving toward faster, more connected, and more efficient models. And whenever a system is built to solve real world inefficiencies at a global scale, it naturally attracts attention from institutions that operate at that level. The evolution is not finished, but it is clearly in progress, and each step forward strengthens the foundation of what could become a much larger transformation in how global value moves across the world. As we reach the final part of this breakdown, it becomes important to connect all the earlier points into a clear picture so you can understand what this situation really represents beyond the headlines. The idea of thousands of banks connecting to modern financial networks is not about a sudden switch where everything changes in one moment. It is about a slow but powerful restructuring of how global money movement is designed. What looks like separate developments on the surface is actually part of a much larger transition happening inside the financial system, where outdated infrastructure is gradually being replaced or upgraded to handle the demands of a faster global economy. At the center of this transformation is the need for efficiency. Every financial institution, whether large or small, is under constant pressure to reduce costs, improve transaction speed, and maintain strict compliance with international regulations. Traditional systems like correspondent banking were never designed for today's level of global activity, where money needs to move across borders instantly for trade, business, and digital commerce. This creates friction in the system, and whenever friction exists at scale, innovation eventually emerges to remove it. That is the natural cycle of financial evolution. When digital assets like XRP are discussed in this context, the focus is not on replacing banks or eliminating traditional finance, but on improving the underlying infrastructure that supports it. The idea is to create a bridge between different financial systems so that value can move more freely without unnecessary delays or costs. If a bank can settle a transaction in seconds instead of days and reduce the capital it needs to hold in foreign accounts, that improvement alone is enough to justify serious interest from the institutional level. The mention of large numbers like 11,000 banks is often what grabs attention, but the real significance is not in the number itself, it is in what that number represents. It represents connectivity, potential integration, and alignment with global financial messaging and payment systems that are evolving over time. Not every institution is actively using the same technology in the same way, but many are becoming part of networks where such technology can be utilized when needed. This is how large scale financial systems evolve, through layered adoption rather than instant migration. Another important point to understand is that financial infrastructure changes are usually invisible at first. Most of the work happens behind the scenes in settlement systems, payment corridors, liquidity frameworks, and compliance layers. These are not things that the average person sees directly, but they are essential for global finance to function. Over time, as more of these systems modernize, the impact becomes visible in faster payments, lower fees, and more efficient global transactions. By the time people fully notice the change, the system has often already been operating in its new form for a significant period.